If you've had blood work done in the last year, your lifespan might already be written on that report, and your doctor probably didn't tell you. Most people believe that cholesterol is the number that determines how long they'll live. It's not. In fact, some of the strongest predictors of lifespan are hiding in plain sight, inside routine blood work that millions of people do every year and completely misunderstand. If you've had blood tests done in the past 12 months, there's a very good chance you already have powerful clues about how fast your body is aging. But here's the problem. Most lab reports are designed to detect disease, not to optimize longevity. There's a big difference between not sick and aging well. Today, I'm going to show you the first of 3 blood markers that research consistently links to lifespan, a marker that reveals metabolic stress, silent damage, and accelerated aging years before a diagnosis ever appears. And the first one is often dismissed. It's called hbA1c. Now, most people think hbA1c is only relevant if you're diabetic or pre-diabetic. That's a mistake. hbA1c measures something called glycation. In simple terms, it tells us how much glucose, sugar, has been attaching to your red blood cells over the past 2 to 3 months. When sugar circulates in your bloodstream, it doesn't just float around harmlessly. It binds to proteins, it sticks to tissues, it creates microscopic damage. This process is slow, silent, and cumulative. And over time, it affects blood vessels, nerves, kidneys, and even your brain. The higher your hbA1c, the more sugar exposure your body has experienced. Now, here's where things get interesting. Most laboratories list a normal hbA1c range as anything below 5.7%, but optimal longevity may exist in a much tighter window. Large population studies have shown that mortality risk begins to increase even before someone crosses into the diabetic range. People with hbA1c levels on the higher end of normal often have higher cardiovascular risk, greater inflammation, and faster biological aging compared to those in the lower range. In other words, you don't need to be diabetic for blood sugar to influence how long you live. Even small elevations, sustained over years, can accelerate damage. Why? Because excess glucose increases oxidative stress. It stiffens blood vessels. It contributes to plaque formation. It disrupts mitochondrial function, and mitochondria are the engines of your cells. When they decline, energy production drops, tissue repair slows down, and aging speeds up. This is why HE is not just a diabetes test, it's a metabolic aging marker. And in modern societies where ultra-processed carbohydrates are everywhere, many people walk around with chronically elevated glucose without realizing it. You might feel fine, you might look healthy, but your blood chemistry could be telling a different story. And here's another layer. Higher hbA1c levels are also associated with increased risk of cognitive decline and dementia. The brain is extremely sensitive to glucose dysregulation. Over time, repeated spikes in blood sugar can impair insulin signaling in the brain, a mechanism some researchers even refer to as type 3 diabetes. So this isn't just about weight. It's not just about diabetes. It's about long-term cellular resilience. Now, that doesn't mean everyone should obsess over achieving the lowest possible number. Extremely low hbA1c levels can also signal other issues, such as anemia or abnormal red blood cell turnover. The goal isn't extreme. The goal is stable, efficient glucose control. For many longevity-focused experts, an hbA1c somewhere around 5.0 to 5.3% is often considered metabolically favorable, though individual context always matters. What raises hbA1c? Frequent blood sugar spikes, highly refined carbohydrates, liquid sugars, chronic stress,
Poor sleep, and that last one is important. Skeletal muscle acts as a glucose reservoir. The more healthy muscle you have, the more efficiently your body can absorb and store glucose after meals. That's one reason resistance training is so strongly associated with longer lifespan. So when someone improves muscle mass, sleep quality, and dietary quality, HbA1c often improves naturally, not through extreme dieting, not through starvation, but through metabolic efficiency. And that's the key concept here. Longevity is less about restriction and more about resilience. When your blood sugar remains stable, you reduce inflammatory stress, you reduce vascular strain, you reduce long-term cellular wear and tear. Over decades, that matters a lot. If you've had blood work done recently, go back and check your HbA1c. Don't just ask, "Am I diabetic?" Ask instead, "What does this number say about my metabolic health? Is this trending up year after year? Am I supporting my body's ability to process energy efficiently?" Because aging is not just about the number of candles on your birthday cake. It's about the biochemical environment inside your body. And HbA1c gives us one of the clues. There are two other markers that may be even more powerful when it comes to predicting lifespan. And the next one is directly linked to inflammation, immune activation, and cardiovascular risk in ways most people completely overlook.
If HbA1c reflects how your body handles sugar, the second marker reflects something even more fundamental to aging: inflammation. Not the kind you feel when you sprain your ankle. I'm talking about chronic, low-grade inflammation, the silent kind that simmers beneath the surface for years before it shows up as heart disease, diabetes, cancer, or cognitive decline. The blood marker is called high-sensitivity C-reactive protein, or hs-CRP. CRP is produced by your liver in response to inflammation. When the immune system is activated, even slightly, CRP levels rise, and with high-sensitivity testing, we can detect even very small elevations. Now here's why this matters. Aging itself is increasingly understood as an inflammatory process. Some researchers even use the term inflammaging to describe the chronic immune activation that accelerates tissue breakdown over time. Large longitudinal studies have consistently shown that individuals with higher hs-CRP levels have a greater risk of cardiovascular events, metabolic disease, and all-cause mortality. Even when cholesterol levels are normal, even when blood pressure looks fine. In fact, some people with perfect traditional markers still carry elevated inflammatory risk, and they don't know it. Generally speaking, an hs-CRP below 1 mg per liter is considered low risk. Between 1 and 3 is moderate risk. Above 3 suggests higher inflammatory burden. But again, we're not just looking at disease thresholds. We're looking at longevity optimization. Because chronic inflammation affects nearly every system in the body. It damages the lining of blood vessels, making plaque more likely to form. It interferes with insulin signaling, worsening metabolic control. It accelerates muscle breakdown. It contributes to joint degeneration. It even affects mood and cognitive clarity. Over decades, that inflammatory load compounds. Now the question becomes, what drives chronic inflammation? Poor sleep, excess visceral fat, sedentary behavior, ultra-processed foods, smoking, chronic psychological stress, gut dysfunction, and, interestingly, unstable blood sugar, which brings us back to HbA1c. These systems are interconnected. When glucose control worsens, inflammation tends to rise. When inflammation rises, insulin resistance often follows. It becomes a feedback loop. That's why longevity isn't about chasing one perfect number. It's about improving the overall biological environment. The good news is that hs-CRP is highly responsive to lifestyle changes.
Resistance training can lower it, regular movement lowers it, adequate sleep lowers it, dietary patterns rich in fiber, omega-3 fats, and polyphenols tend to reduce it. Even modest fat loss, particularly around the abdomen, can significantly decrease inflammatory markers. And here's something important. Inflammation is not the enemy. Acute inflammation is protective. It helps you heal. It fights infections. The problem is when the inflammatory switch never fully turns off. When your immune system stays slightly activated day after day, year after year. That persistent signal quietly accelerates biological aging. So if HbA1c tells us about metabolic stress, hs-CRP tells us about inflammatory stress. Together, they provide a more complete picture of how much internal pressure your body is under. And when both are elevated, the long-term risk increases substantially. But there's one more marker that may be even more predictive of lifespan, a marker that reflects oxygen delivery, cardiovascular strain, and overall physiological resilience, and it's one that many people overlook completely.
The third marker is simple. It's included in almost every basic blood panel, and yet very few people realize how strongly it correlates with lifespan. It's your resting hemoglobin level, and more broadly, markers related to red blood cell health. Hemoglobin is the protein inside red blood cells that carries oxygen from your lungs to every tissue in your body. Oxygen is not optional. Every cell depends on it to produce energy efficiently. Without adequate oxygen delivery, mitochondrial function declines. Energy production drops, repair mechanisms slow, fatigue increases, organ performance suffers. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Both low and excessively high hemoglobin levels are associated with increased mortality risk. If hemoglobin is too low, it may indicate anemia, nutrient deficiencies, chronic disease, or impaired bone marrow function. Low oxygen carrying capacity forces the heart to work harder, increases strain on the cardiovascular system, and reduces physical resilience. People with chronically low hemoglobin often experience fatigue, reduced exercise tolerance, brain fog, and slower recovery. Over time, this reduced physiological reserve can make them more vulnerable to illness and stress. On the other hand, hemoglobin that is too high can increase blood viscosity, meaning the blood becomes thicker. Thicker blood increases the risk of clot formation, stroke, and cardiovascular events. Again, longevity lives in the optimal range, not at extremes. But hemoglobin doesn't exist in isolation. It reflects deeper systems: iron status, kidney function, hormonal balance, hydration, bone marrow health. Chronic inflammation can suppress red blood cell production. Nutrient deficiencies like iron, B12, or folate can impair oxygen delivery. Kidney dysfunction can alter erythropoietin signaling, affecting red blood cell production. So, when we look at hemoglobin, we're not just looking at oxygen transport, we're looking at systemic resilience. Now, think about this. If HbA1c reflects metabolic stress, if hs-CRP reflects inflammatory stress, then Hb reflects oxygen and energy delivery. Metabolism, inflammation, energy delivery. These three systems form a foundation for biological aging. When glucose is unstable, inflammation rises. When inflammation rises, red blood cell production can be impaired. When oxygen delivery drops, tissues age faster. It's all connected. And this is why longevity medicine is shifting away from single disease thinking. Instead of asking, do you have heart disease, the better question becomes,
How well is your body maintaining balance across its core systems? Because aging is not a single event. It's accumulated stress across multiple biological networks. Now, this doesn't mean you should obsess over every lab value. Context matters. Trends over time matter more than one isolated result. Your age, medical history, medications, and lifestyle all influence interpretation. But if you want a practical starting point, review these 3 markers in your most recent blood work: HbA1c for metabolic control, hs-CRP for inflammatory burden, and hemoglobin for oxygen carrying capacity. Look at where they fall. Look at how they've changed over the years. Ask whether your lifestyle supports stability in these systems. Because longevity isn't about hacks, it's about reducing chronic stress on the body, metabolically, immunologically, and energetically. When those systems function efficiently, the body has a greater ability to repair, adapt, and withstand time. And that's what we are really trying to achieve. Not just a longer life, but a more resilient one.